Good morning and welcome to the Grande Prairie and District Chamber of Commerce Community Pulse Series. My name is Tertius Jennis and I'm first Vice Chair of the Chamber. We acknowledge the Treaty 8 territory, the ancestral and traditional territory of the Cree, Dene, as well as the Métis. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. We recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. This session is being recorded to share later, so you do have the option of turning off your camera. There will be time for questions at the end, but if something comes to mind, you can type it in the chat box and we will add it to the list of questions. The Grande Prairie area has a robust and diverse economy. The Community Pulse Series is designed to provide updates and insights from a variety of industries, sectors, and organizations that make up the fabric of our unique and incredible community. Thank you to our presenting partners, the City of Grande Prairie, the County of Grande Prairie, Grande Prairie Regional Innovation Network, and TC Energy, and our supporting partners, Chambers Plan, represented by local broker Hub International, Community Futures Grande Prairie and Region, GetintheLoop Grande Prairie, and the Municipal District of Greenview. Now, to introduce this week's presenter, Kelly McTaggart currently serves as the Community Engagement Advisor for the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. In this role, Kelly executes CAPP stakeholder engagement efforts in municipalities and business communities throughout Western Canada. Prior to joining CAPP in May of 2018, Kelly worked for Spectra Energy and Enbridge in Indigenous and community relations for major projects. Kelly's priorities focus on providing industry updates for various communities and organizations while advocating for socially and environmentally responsible performance. Kelly resides in Calgary and represents CAPP on the Synergy Alberta Board of Directors. She also holds a seat on the board of the Public Affairs Association of Canada and is an events chair for their Alberta chapter. Please welcome Kelly.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's too bad that I can't be there in person. I considered Grande Prairie my second home for many years. So anyway, one day soon, hopefully. I know that we're all kind of surprised to be, or maybe not surprised to be back at home. So that being said, I'll jump right into things. And thank you, Cindy, for organizing this. The Grande Prairie Chamber is an important relationship for us. And the community is a huge contributor to the provincial and national economy. So I just wanted to mention how important that is to us. So jumping right into things, Tom, maybe you can go to the next slide. Just a really quick overview as to who we are. So we are the largest industry association in Canada, and we represent large and small producer member companies. And these member companies explore for, develop, and produce natural gas and oil throughout Canada. So although our main office is in Calgary, we have offices coast to coast and a wide range of professionals that work for our organization. And we also have associate members that provide a wide range of services that support the upstream crude and natural gas industry in Canada. Next slide. So for the purpose of this conversation today, I wouldn't call it the most linear presentation. I really put things in this presentation that I thought would be interesting for the audience. So some of that is where we are within the context of the current election, very timely. I don't think anybody in CAPP has done a presentation since the results have come out. And then also some of the priorities that we're working on provincially within the context too of kind of what's happening in terms of pricing in the markets and what the forecasts are looking from a cost and demand perspective. Next slide. Okay, so from crisis-based to recovery phase, it really goes without saying that the past year and a half has been unprecedented in so many ways. And Canadians coast to coast watch as jobs disappeared and businesses closed their doors, not just in our sector, but also across sectors in Canada. And Canada's energy sector was no exception, and we were faced with some of the biggest challenges that we've ever seen. And part of this really does need to be framed, you know, from the context that we had just gone through a downturn in 2014, 2015. And so in some ways, we were able to be a little bit more resilient just by the fact that we were already more nimble compared to some of the other global jurisdictions that produce energy products, because we were already operating in a very lean cost environment. So that being said, in January of 2020, we're just going to go back to the beginning here. We released an annual capital forecast, which showed an increase in spending in both the oil sands and conventional sectors for the first time since 2014. So 2020 was really supposed to be the year that we not only saw an increase in spending, but we kind of got to a level where we would have a new baseline for increased investment in the province and in the sector in Canada. So when the COVID crisis hit at the same time, you know, there was a global oil price war that was instigated by Russia and Saudi Arabia, and this wiped out about $12 billion worth of capital spending in Canada. So the release that we put out in January was really scratched altogether. And for the first time ever, well, not ever, but in many, many years, we saw negative prices for our product in the spring of 2020. Now we really see that our industry still has the best days ahead of it. In fact, over the past year, our industry has rallied, and we're approaching a future with cautious optimism of global prices are expected to precede COVID-19 levels by 2023. And all credible forecasts are showing this. So as we kind of look at these forecasts, and I'll get a little bit more into the numbers, we really want to focus on 4 key elements in Canada's recovery, and those are listed here. So creating and retaining good jobs, generating pan-Canadian benefits with a strong focus on reconciliation with Indigenous communities, advancing environmental leadership, at home and abroad, and building wealth and value while shrinking Canada's debt. Next slide. So I like to start off with this slide because it really shows, well, it paints the picture of a longer term forecast. So as I mentioned, global energy demand rebounds to its pre-crisis levels in what we expect to be 2023. And this is the International Energy Agency's numbers. You can see here the global energy mix in terms of energy sources. You know, it should be noted that we have seen a revised version of this report, and we're seeing steeper increases in natural gas and oil and steeper reductions in coal use. I think an important thing to note, again, I'll talk about this a little bit further on, but we are seeing some really interesting pricing patterns with natural gas right now. And so I think we need to think about coal within that context as well, because we're seeing extremely high prices in Europe. And so in Canada, we're always talking about the Asian story. You know, we're always trying to export our product and build capacity for the Asian markets, which is still very relevant. But I think the last year has really shown that there are other jurisdictions in the world that are seeing increased energy pressures, and Europe is one of those areas. So as I said, I'll talk about that a little bit further on. I should mention too that this visual, you can keep it on that slide, Tom, that's okay. This visual here, well, the infographic is framed within the Paris Climate Agreement. So if we are to meet our Paris Agreement targets, this is the proposed mix that would fit within that. Okay, so this jobs graphic is just kind of a quick overview of the number of jobs in Canada. The industry contributes to over 500,000 indirect jobs, and of course, Alberta is at the top of that list. Next slide. So you can kind of take note of some of these numbers. I won't get into them in too much detail. I think it just shows, the economic contributions of the Canadian economy and how important the industry really is. But as you kind of look through those, I'll just say some words on the election. So I think, this election result really affirms the uncertainty in Canada as we continue to struggle with public health and economic issues related to the COVID pandemic. Maybe I'm not saying this as CAPP, but I think this will go down as one of the, perhaps the most useless election in Canadian history. But where this fits in terms of, the federal government and working with them moving forward, the natural gas and oil industry is really ready to continue our work with the federal government to rebuild our economy in a way that advances a few things. First and foremost, Indigenous reconciliation and achieving environmental goals while creating sustainable jobs and opportunities for Canadians. I want to reiterate that the global demand for natural gas and oil is growing and will make up over 50% of the global energy supply by 2040. So when we think about Canada as, the only producer in the top 10 producers globally, we are the only one with environmental regulations and standards to this day. So if we don't foster an economic environment that we can produce our product, we are going to, experience mass carbon leakage to other jurisdictions. So, a few things on this, today as economies around the world begin their recovery, energy prices, as I mentioned, are rapidly rising. And this is happening because of inflation and also bottlenecks in the manufacturing sector. And this is causing countries to turn back to coal for electricity. And even the United States, has had to ask OPEC and Russia to produce more oil to help lower gasoline prices. So the combination of the ongoing pandemic, years of sluggish commodity prices, and government policies around the world designed to slow production of fossil fuels has turned investment away from the sector, particularly in North America. And on top of that, particularly Canada. So the point here is that the Liberal Party's targets are very ambitious, and we're willing to work with them, to make sure that we're creating a sustainable future, which is incredibly important. But we need to work to drive investment back into Canada as well, to ensure that there is this environmental innovation component as well. Next slide. So this is just a visual of global emissions and kind of where we fit into that. The oil sands is Canada's largest emitter in terms of industry, and it only accounts for 0.17% of global GHG emissions. And you can see here Canada compared to other jurisdictions globally. One thing to note too is the oil and natural gas industry in Canada is the single largest investor in clean technologies. 75% of the $1 billion invested in 2019 was supported by the sector. So within this context, as I said, we don't want to experience a carbon leakage scenario whereby the economics of production no longer make sense in Canada, because that would not make sense from a global emissions perspective. And we don't want this taking place in other jurisdictions that don't have ESG standards. Okay, next slide. So bold measures have been taken by governments across the sectors, but there is more to be done to preserve jobs across the country, both during the crisis and as we forge a path ahead towards what could be a long and protracted recovery. We're seeing that now. I don't think, if you had asked me 6 months ago if we would be here today, I don't think that, the result would have been the same as what we're experiencing. So CAPP is forecasting a 14% increase this year. We're seeing those numbers stay true. So we are expected to reach 27.3 billion in capital investment. And this is really important because it is projected to reverse a dramatic decline that actually started in 2014. So as I mentioned, this isn't just pandemic speak. This is a decline that started in 2014 when the upstream capital investment reached $81 billion, which was the highest we've seen in Canada. Next slide. And this just shows a breakdown of that, between the oil sands and the conventional sectors. This is a good news story for Grande Prairie, of course, because you focus more on the conventional side of the business with the Montney play and also servicing the Duvernay as well. So this is just kind of a keen look to show that the conventional is actually increasing by 18% this year. Next slide. So this very quickly is just, I wanted to kind of give a visual as to what's happening with the natural gas pricing. So this shows the North American natural gas pricing. And on a day-to-day basis, I think we were down for the first time in quite a few weeks just yesterday. But we are seeing unprecedented gas prices right now. What's really interesting about this is that, typically we see lower natural gas prices in the summer, and we've seen a continuous incline in pricing across the last several months. I wish I should have, and I will for the next presentation, shown the European gas prices, across this, as well as the Asian prices as well. But, gas prices in Europe are reaching about $25 or equivalent of $25, where we still are hovering, below $4. I think we're going to creep up again, but so the comparative is really important because the gas market chaos, which has driven prices about 280% higher in Europe, has also created a surge in the United States of about 100+%. So what that means is that there's opportunity for Canada in a few ways. One, from a pricing perspective, but also by the sheer volume of gas that we have that's accessible. And so, as Europe now looks to coal as an option, which we didn't think we would be seeing, we really have an opportunity to get into that conversation. So, and as I mentioned, this is because of inflation pressures inflicted by COVID-19 and supply chain bottlenecks. Next slide. So in terms of what's happening in Alberta, I did want to give just a quick update on our closure and liability priorities, as this was a stimulus incentive by the federal government. So in April 2020, the federal government announced $1.72 billion in funding to support economic recovery and the closure of inactive and orphan well sites across the Western provinces. And Alberta received the most out of this bucket. So Alberta received $1.2 billion. And throughout 2021, CAPP continued to actively engage with all three of these provinces to influence the design of this grant program. And the provincial government also put up additional funds for this. So this really is the breakdown of this. Approximately $230 million has been paid out to oil field service companies, and almost half of this has been allocated as part of this program. So we know where about half of the million or half of the allocated funds are going. I do get the question all the time, do you have a list of what companies or geographically where this money has gone? And unlike BC, there is no list published in Alberta of successful applicants and contractors. But I will say the money flows directly to contractors and licensees with any Alberta contractor that, the producers so choose. So given the nature of the Grande Prairie economy, I would assume that many local businesses are benefiting from this program. Next slide. The other priority is our Upgrade Alberta campaign. So we've been working on this since January, and we are looking to advance it through the provincial government before Christmas. So next slide. So Upgrade Alberta, this campaign really focuses on the bitumen valuation methodology. And although this may seem quite specific to the oil sands, I did want to mention it because it does impact the Grande Prairie region and also the province as a whole. So just a quick overview, the bitumen valuation methodology, which we'll call BVM, is the largest investment or largest barrier to investment in Alberta. So it was implemented in 2009 under the royalty review and was meant to temporarily set a value on bitumen produced in the oil sands until a market-based approach could be implemented. So basically what it means is that our product is not valued on market-based pricing, which of course right now is also a huge problem because we're seeing huge prices. And another differentiating factor is that BVM only applies to some bitumen. So here's the difference. Integrated oil sands operations that process bitumen into a higher value product are subject to this government developed BVM formula. So upgrading our product in Alberta has become extremely challenging and is not cost effective. You know, when we get the question, why aren't we refining our product in Alberta? It's really because of this pricing methodology. Producers who sell raw bitumen directly to refineries or other markets are not. They pay a much lower fee per barrel. Next slide. So our data, and this is supported by third-party sources, BVM overestimates bitumen value anywhere from $4 to $8 a barrel. And because of this, we've seen producers leave Canada from an upgrading perspective and have gone to the United States. And they've spent about $18 billion on upgraders and refineries. New upgraders and expansions of existing upgraders have been shelved in Canada. We actually haven't seen a greenfield oil sands development project sanctioned since 2013, and that's nearly a decade ago. So what we're asking for is really to go back to market-based pricing, and eliminating BVM will ensure Albertans receive full and fair value for our resource. I think one thing that's very important within this context and for the general industry is that removing BVM would actually produce additional pipeline capacity, and as much as 40% is what our numbers have shown us. And this is because when you're shipping raw product and you're shipping it elsewhere to be refined, you need to add diluent to the product. So we're essentially adding product that doesn't add value to the raw product when we ship it, which creates or takes up quite a lot of pipeline capacity. And so that being said, we're really looking, to upgrade our products here, which also has value chain implications as well in terms of technology. And, this can impact producers in the midstream space as well. And this is just kind of a highlight. The next slide, yeah, thanks. So why the government of Alberta should fix BVM, and there's just some data here. Greater pipeline capacity. We expect, if they remove this, we could see up to 40,000 new jobs within the next 10 years because of facility announcements. And next slide. So I think I'll pass it over to the group to have a discussion. I think that's kind of my time limit. But if there's any questions, please let me know. I think the big things to kind of focus on is just driving the competitiveness story, as well as the ESG story from, a government relations perspective, especially right now at the federal level.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Kelly. As you mentioned, we definitely have some time for questions, and you can either raise your chat box hand, so to speak, and also Also put them in the chat. I see there's already one there, so we can start right away.
Yeah, so partial upgrading is affected by BVM. We have, well, quite a few years ago, not quite a few years ago, but within the last kind of 5 years, there's been a lot of focus on partial upgrading in the province. But because it's still partial to this formula-based pricing, and in most cases, we've seen partial upgrading projects canceled. And we've seen this in large part at some of the larger refineries in Alberta. So Shell's complex outside of Edmonton is a good example of that, as well as some of the partial upgrading projects in Eastern Alberta, so kind of Cold Lake region. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, any other questions? In the meantime, I have a question for you, Kelly, just more clarification. On one of your slides, you indicated that there were the direct, indirect jobs were around about 522,000. I did see it was mentioned for 2019. If you must make a guess, what would those numbers be today?
It would be about the same. So the reason why we share 2019 data is because Stats Canada information always comes out a year later. And so that's why we're still dealing with those numbers. But the projection for this year was somewhere around 500,000. We haven't seen the numbers go below 500,000 in quite a few years. And I don't think, given that we've actually seen an uptick in capital spending in the industry, despite layoffs and some of those aspects of it, employment would probably still be around 500,000.
Kelly, are you able to speak to some of the partnerships that are still moving forward with some valuable projects? And I'm thinking especially in the Indigenous partnership area, just maybe how that's helping the industry try to move forward.
Yeah, I think there's a lot happening in the narrative space with economic reconciliation and some of the work that industry is doing, with Indigenous communities in the space of economic reconciliation. I can actually share some data, which I think you might find interesting. So in 2019, approximately 14,000 self-identified Indigenous peoples were directly employed in Canada's oil and gas sector, which represented just over 7% of total oil and gas employment. And this is up from about 4.8% in 2018. So we've seen a huge amount of growth in the Indigenous employment space. And so in the oil and gas sector, as I said, we're about 7% of total employment, and this is compared to 3% in other industries. Pipeline transportation and oil and gas extraction represent the top 3 highest paid sectors for Indigenous peoples, and they pay approximately 4 times what Indigenous peoples make on average. So to put this into numbers, the average is about $30,000 in Canada versus $117,000 for Indigenous peoples who work in the sector. I think in terms of the biggest partnerships that are happening right now, a lot of those are taking place in BC in the LNG space. We have quite a lot of data for the oil sand side of things as well, but I think the most prevalent are these new partnerships, in British Columbia and the LNG. So Cedar LNG is one of those, which would be an Indigenous-owned LNG project with Pembina. And then we're also seeing quite a lot of stake in LNG Canada, as well as TMX as well.
Thank you. Cindy Park, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Tertius. Kelly, I just have a question regarding your BVM model there. You talked about the increase in economic value to the province, but the diluent that's being added is condensate. So you're actually going to be affecting producers that produce condensate. So I'm not sure if that is an accurate number.
So actually, I do have some data on this, and I'm happy to share it because we have done the numbers on this. And I think in some cases, the diluent isn't always condensate, was my understanding. I'm not the most technical expert on the subject, but I'm happy to share some information on that. And then I should mention as well is that we have a report coming out through CD Howe Institute next week, actually. So this is timely, which I can share with the group as well next week when it comes out. But there was a large focus on pipeline capacity in that report, and also the effective diluent in.
Well, and in our region, there's a lot of condensate production, so that would definitely impact the producers around our region. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me send out some information because we have done quite a lot of work on that, so I'd be happy to follow up.
Thank you for that. Any other questions?
We're hearing more about hydrogen opportunities in Alberta and elsewhere. Are you able to speak about some of those potential projects?
Yeah, there's a huge opportunity in Alberta, and part of that too is because we have older assets as well. So from just a basin asset, especially in southern Alberta, there's a lot of opportunity for carbon capture and storage. You know, industry, a lot of capital investment is being put into this space. In Calgary, is one example of this is we're seeing innovation startups, think tank models that are focusing on this in order to receive funding from organizations like XPRIZE and also government streams for innovation. So we do see this as a huge opportunity, specifically blue hydrogen in the province. So those are kind of the areas of focus right now. I think as we see a new federal budget come out, one that will be, we're not really sure, but at some point in the near-ish future, I think there'll be a huge focus on hydrogen and you know, CCUS. So those are kind of the core federal priorities from a climate perspective. So CAPP is continuing to work with our producers in that space for sure.
Trying to make lemonade out of lemons. The results of the federal election, does it at least maybe provide some continuity as far as the ongoing talks are concerned? You know, at least you kind of have a starting point as to, you know, we've had these discussions and you know, maybe we can try and move, you know, advance these forward a little bit. You know, it may not have been the most friendly discussions over some of the, you know, the topics, but at least now, you know, maybe you can just continue those discussions and try and gain some progress or some ground on some of the contentious issues.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in some cases, it's the devil, you know. So yeah, we'll continue to work with the federal government on our priorities. And I think, you know, as you said, there can be a benefit to familiarity with members of government and what we're working with. I would expect there to be some announcements you know, on some of the campaigns that they're working on. The Just campaign is one that comes to mind, and the transition into off fossil fuels. So we're kind of working on that right now at CAPP, just in terms of a number perspective and what they're putting out. So yeah, that's where we're at, just continuing to work and advocate, and our government relations team in Ottawa is very busy.
How about opportunities overseas? Are there still opportunities to be had, and how do we take advantage of those?
Yeah, there is lots of opportunity. I mean, as I mentioned with the pricing, the Asian kind of perspective is always going to be a huge opportunity for us, just with the displacement of coal in the energy mix. I think one important part of this story too is that TMX will be the first pipeline that really exports in a major way to the Asian markets. And so once that project's done, we may see an uptick in production from that. So those are kind of the big opportunities there. And then also as the LNG industry opens up in Canada. So
can I also add value added product creation from raw product like methanol?
Yeah, that's, another great.
Yeah, even competitors.
Yeah, plastics as well. We've definitely seen an increase in demand and that with COVID. So yeah, those are kind of the key areas. I think, there's over 10 projects right now in British Columbia that get their gas from the Montney basins. And so that will directly impact your region because of the oil field service industry and the professional expertise that you have.
Maybe for those that aren't familiar, can you just explain LNG and its uses and its relationship with this region? Why it is such an important opportunity for our area?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so very high level. So LNG or liquid natural gas is basically a liquid form of the gaseous product of natural gas, and it's condensed into a liquid, through temperature control, basically. So for the example of LNG Canada, this takes place in Kitimat. So the gas product is shipped to terminals, and it is reduced to about 200 times smaller than its original state. So kind of taken from like a beach ball to a golf ball size, and then transported as a liquid to market. So this is shipped by ships, by boat. And then when it arrives, it is then taken and expanded back into a gaseous state. So it's really an opportunity for moving volume. From an emissions perspective, it's quite a bit lower. So, to displace about one coal plant in Asia through an LNG facility in Canada, it's the equivalent of taking about 80,000 cars off the road on a permanent basis. And we're seeing a lot of LNG use in the transportation space. So, a good example of this is BC Ferries is transitioning over to LNG and replacing, higher hydrocarbon usage like diesel products. And we'll see this, more in the cruise line space and that sort of thing, but it's very advantageous from a transportation perspective. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it does. I wasn't sure, Tertius, did you have a question to jump in with, or?
No, I don't see any other.
I wanted to go back to hydrogen and maybe just a kind of a high level explanation about the term blue hydrogen and just to kind of maybe just make it a little more clear for people, because there are a lot of terms out there that get thrown around, and it might help to just for people to better understand the opportunities.
Yeah, most definitely. I have a very good fact sheet that I can share in this group chat. I'm just gonna find this here.
In the meantime, maybe Gerald can fill us in a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hi everybody. Gerald Faschat with Nautical Energy. I'm the Vice President of Environment and Regulatory, and we're planning to construct a world-scale blue methanol plant right by IP pulp mill down south of town. And we've advanced it quite a ways, including the blue component. And I think when Kelly distributes the information, you'll see that there's gradations from black to green when it comes to hydrogen or methanol or other value-added products to maybe reach different markets. In our case, we want to condense the energy of the natural gas produced in the region and create a liquid methanol that's more condensed, easier to transport. And in order to do that, environmentally, we got to capture the carbon dioxide and put it underground permanently. There's a whole pile of stuff happening with government right now on expressions of interest for new hubs. We know about the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line hub in the Edmonton area that takes gas, CO2 down to central Alberta for enhanced oil recovery. And there was another recent announcement to gather stuff from the oil sands area and also the power plants. I live west of Edmonton out in the country and right near the big power generating stations out at Wabamun, and to gather all that and create a second hub. And so expressions of interest are being accepted by the province right now for additional hubs. And one area that Nautical believes is ripe for it is the Grande Prairie region. There's a ton of work that has to go into that in order to make it happen. But we have a project that is going to be gathering and sequestering an equivalent amount to the Shell Quest project that has been running for a few years out north of Edmonton. So we believe that it's a great story for the region to get to the blue methanol, and blue means you capture the CO2 and sequester it. Black is what we're displacing, and that's coal-derived methanol in China, where they take actual coal, they gasify it, make natural gas out of coal. So that's an energy intensive and CO2 intensive process. And then they create methanol out of that. So if anyone is interested to look at air quality in Asia, I think we all know it's poor in China, and it's not just CO2 that we're affecting. We're trying to affect air quality as well. And our plant is very benign from an air quality perspective. We're going to be using the newest technology to get this done, capture the CO2 and create blue methanol. So it goes from black, that's coal derived, to gray, that's natural gas derived, but no carbon capture, to what we're doing, blue, that's natural gas based carbon capture, whether it's hydrogen, ammonia, or methanol. Whatever you're creating, it's blue. And then green is when you're deriving it from a non-hydrocarbon source, like using renewable energy and water to create hydrogen or methanol. And that's just not world scale yet. The best world scale that you can do, and the first one in the world, will be located south of Grande Prairie and run by Nautical.
We had a question in the box about when will Nautical start construction?
So right now we're in financing phase for our detailed engineering. We've got our design basis done. We've picked our technology and technology providers. We have the land set aside with the County of Grande Prairie by IP. And we've got our water license approved for the full project build out. And this coming winter, spring, and next summer, we'll be finishing engineering and doing a final investment decision probably by the end of next year, with construction starting within a year of that or two, and start production in 2026. That's it'd be first quarter of 2026 is the current plan. But it's challenging markets right now, as Kelly mentioned. It's money is hard to come by, and we need, in order to get our hydrocarbon resources that we have in the Peace Country and add some value to it, we need lots of investment, and it's not an easy task, you guys. Oh, thanks, Kelly. But yeah, I would love to take more questions on this, but it's looking like construction start 2020 or production start 2026 at this point. Thanks.
There's another challenge finding labor. and retaining labor. I know it is for a number of industries and businesses. What can either or both of you speak to some of those challenges that you're finding in the sector? Maybe we'll start with Kelly.
Sorry, you just cut out there. Can you just ask the last part of that question again?
Sorry, I was just talking about maybe just some of the challenge is finding and keeping labor a challenge. How much of a challenge is it for the industry?
So I would be interested to hear Gerald's thoughts on this, but in terms of trades, there is a huge shortage right now in the industry. It's been very, very challenging to find skilled labor, especially on kind of essential service type of work. So turnarounds and, projects that are government regulated. And I think this is really because people have, who had previously been traveling quite a bit for work, had the experience of not traveling around and kind of looking for contract to contract work, and maybe they've left the industry to take, lower paying positions closer to home. And then we're also seeing a lot of diversification in the workforce. So we've seen a lot of skilled labor go back to school for various things, which we're kind of noticing through some of the job statistics that we see. So those are kind of the challenges there. And then I'll just say, so I did just send the Arcan kind of executive summary. And the first part of it, if you just look at the executive summary, has a lot of good points there. So yeah, just a quick overview if people want to have that in their back pockets.
Maybe Gerald, if you wanted to chime in with your thoughts on the labor issue.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And just before we get onto that, the document from NRCan is excellent. And I would just suggest to folks that there's a real cachet around hydrogen right now, but there's also ammonia and there's also methanol, and big shipping lines like Maersk lines are announcing ammonia and methanol driven ocean-going vessels, special built and retrofit, which hydrogen just can't be used for right now. Hydrogen's tough to condense and transport, right? So things like ammonia and methanol are actually hydrogen carriers, and you can take the condensed form, take it somewhere, extract the hydrogen and use the hydrogen somewhere else. So there's multiple layers to this thing. And what Nautical is doing is condensing the natural gas into methanol that can be used directly, or it can be used for petrochemical feedstock or a source of hydrogen. But at least you can ship it by liquid and train and not get into the pipeline thing, right? Which has caused nothing but heartache for the energy industry for the last God knows how many decades. So we avoid that. But so please read that. From a labor perspective, our operations are forecast to be in the 250 to 260 full-time jobs in the region. During construction, we'll have to bring in lots of folks from outside of the region, but we're working hard. Our VP of External Relations up in Grande Prairie, Terry Ellen Sudnick, which lots of you guys know. She works hard in linking the First Nations and Indigenous peoples in the region, and also more broadly throughout BC and Alberta, and even into the territories, to work with their leadership and get the diversity in the workplace that both the Indigenous people and Nautical wants, right? They're equity owners of Nautical. Horse Lake First Nation, others have expressed a great deal of interest in actually becoming an owner. And they view this as an opportunity for generational change. So the Grande Prairie Regional College, as they're transforming themselves into a broader school, Terry works with them on their board, works with the chamber, works with the MD, with county, city, and we're trying to get the opportunities established regionally so that we can train folks that are interested in working in long-term, stable, value-added jobs that support the upstream oil and gas extraction business that we're so good at in Grande Prairie, not so good at doing the value added there. And we all know MD of Greenview, who's on the line here, Carrie, can probably talk about gig and the work that's going on there, and they trying to, attract even more value added petrochemical type facilities. It's wonderful work. Yeah, so we're 260 folks. We believe that we have the time and the drive and the partners to be able to build that over time, and kind of like the pulp mill, right? It's that scale, and it's lots of locals work there, right? And they go to school, come back, work for IP. That's what we intend to see happening here. And I'm an old Grande Prairie guy. I mean, I remember Pat's Auto Supply down where 214 place is, so that's how old I am. Dad worked there in the 50s. Yeah, so we're quite bullish about the ability, and I don't, if anyone's interested on the line, you can get Tom to give you our. I think Terry's probably the right contact on that. Tom,
Appreciate
I'm
that,
glad
Gerald.
to
Yeah.
talk to anybody.
I didn't want to throw Carrie under the bus if she wasn't there to talk about gig opportunities. But,
Listen, brother, I have no problem throwing Terry under the bus. It's a part-time job for me.
She scares me sometimes, so I don't want to, overstep my bounds or anything.
I'm
Sorry,
not
Carrie.
scary.
She's not scary. She's like a methanol plant packed on two legs and walking down the street. She's got a lot of power in her.
We'd love to hear if you have a comment or two, Carrie.
I will talk about the gig next week at our community pulse when the MD of Greenview presents. How about that?
That's perfect. Thank you for that. Kelly, we have our Peace Region Energy Show returning next May, and we're very excited about that. And just wondering about the relationships between producers of some of the other forms of energy, and how the oil and gas industry can support them, and help maybe in some areas of transition. I mean, we know that oil and gas isn't going away anytime soon, and it plays such a huge role, and maybe just some of those relationships, and that they're not working independently. They are working together to provide energy resources for Canadians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most definitely. I think a lot of the change is actually happening within the sector itself. As I mentioned earlier, the sector is the largest single private investor of clean tech in Canada, and about 75% of the total spend on innovation actually comes from our sector. So that being said, I think that there's kind of an internal revolution, we can call it, happening right within the sector. And I think that's really where we need to be going anyway. We need to be looking for diversification. That being said, it's very clear that energy demand is continuing to rise. We're seeing record numbers in projections from the International Energy Agency and other credible sources. And so that being said, we need this foundational component from the oil and gas sector, while also diversifying into different options. And this is also just not just moving into green technologies, but also finding efficiencies within our industry. And I think hydrogen is a really good example of that. So yeah, that's what I would say. We continue to work with our member companies, and also are working with other institutions, academic institutions, think tanks, etc. To move forward.
Education, I guess, is a big one. To encourage people that want to find out more about the industry and can get involved. I guess there's, whether you're learning on the job or you're learning through the educational institutions, like are there still pretty good options there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of innovation center type infrastructure being developed at universities. We're seeing this at U of C right now through their engineering department. And so there is a lot of funding through those streams going into tech development. And so CAPP always, continues to support education, post-secondary institutions in that space. But I think that is a really good way of even pivoting, our workforce as well, from kind of the offset. So that's kind of where we're coming from with that.
Thanks, Kelly.
Excellent. I think we're just about out of time here, and fantastic discussion. Love the directions this discussion went, the learnings from it. Certainly I learned a lot, and Gerald, thanks for that update on Nautical. Fortunately, 2026 is not that far off, so definitely that's on our radar now. So again, thanks for that update. And again, to Kelly McTaggart with CAPP for joining us today and your valuable insights, and definitely positive news in there as well, and especially for our region. So we're very appreciative of that, and for everyone's participation and taking time out of your busy schedules, much appreciated. Again, I would like to acknowledge our presenting partners, the City of GP, County of GP, Grande Prairie Regional Innovation Network, and TC Energy. Our supporting partners, Chambers Plan with Local Broker Hub International, Community Futures, Grande Prairie and Region, GetintheLoop Grande Prairie, and the Municipal District of Greenview. Our next sessions, as we got a bit of an appetite for next week's, is the Municipal District of Greenview, and definitely learn more about GIG. October 6th with the County of Grande Prairie. Registration is always available on our website, grandeprairiechamber.com. Again, thanks everyone. Have a splendid day and have a wonderful rest of your week.